Today's episode of the Rough Drafts podcast is brought to you by Unicorn.com, the world's premier esports betting site. Their esports book covers all of your favorite titles, including League of Legends. Bet for free with Unicoins, which you can use to enter raffles for gaming prizes, and even earn Unicoins just by playing your favorite games. Some regions can even place real money bets. And while you're there, be sure to check out the esports news page where you can read great articles from their writing staff, including me, your host Chase RedShirtKing Wassenar. It's time to put your esports expertise to the test. Log on today. Hello Internet, this is Chase RedShirtKing Wassenar, and welcome to the RedShirtKing Manifesto. That's right, it's time, ladies and gentlemen. The World Championship Quarterfinals are upon us. We are in the bracket stage. The groups have been settled. The final games of that side of things have come to a close. This means that Taiwan, we can say goodbye. I hope you enjoyed your stay. AHQ taking their one win over SK Telecom. That's got to be enough to keep them going for a while. Of course, we also say goodbye to Turkey and Vietnam, though I'm not sure that we necessarily expected those teams to get out. Gigabyte Marines certainly made it a lot closer than we thought it was going to be. And of course, now we're left with 8 teams remaining. And while I would love to go back and look over every single game from each group stage, I think that in order to give you guys the best content possible, I'm going to try to keep the group wrap-ups down to a few minutes for each one, and then we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of this, which is the quarterfinals podcast. So let's get straight into it. Let's talk about Group A. So I did already mention that AHQ was able to sneak that upset victory over SK Telecom, but of course that's not the big story of the day, is it? AHQ beating the Koreans, maintaining that reputation of Taiwan being the Korean killers, and then falling off in the next 2 games and looking absolutely atrocious in them. Well, that's just AHQ being AHQ. No, the interesting narrative that I think pervaded all of these games was how much could Edward Gaming close the gap? And if you're a Cloud9 fan, you watch this very differently from, I think, the rest of the esports world. Because if you're a Cloud9 fan, this was the, oh my god, do we hold on to this spot? Because what seemed so clearly wrapped up after week 1 was now being held in doubt. The AHQ win meant that they'd showed a potential that you hadn't seen before, and of course, Cloud9 played AHQ in the last game of their night, so there was no way for them to know, like, oh yeah, AHQ's totally, we've taken care of that. They had to do it themselves at the very end in a do-or-die moment. And EDG, because they were playing so well, they crushed Cloud9. They crushed AHQ. You had this moment where you had to wonder, like, is this the time in which we see SKT fall, EDG gets to 3-3, and now we have this tiebreaker, and could Cloud9 have kept up with that? And to be honest, if you're not a Cloud9 fan, you were probably hoping that that was indeed how this was going to play out, because EDG looked better in week 2 than Cloud9 has if you take both weeks into account. Especially since week 2 is all done on a single day, you have to take all of this stuff into account and understand that there is a different set of skills that are being challenged here, and to be a World Championship caliber team, you've got to be able to handle both. EDG could not put it together in week 1, and those 3 losses were absolutely deserved. Scout was far too egotistical and really got punished in a way that I think held the rest of the team around him back. But man, when that EDG team is good, they look so good. the decisiveness, especially from iBoy, was something I was not expecting to really come to the forefront. And, there are going to be some Cloud9 fans who say, but hey, look, it's not like we did poorly. And no, it's absolutely true. You guys had a really nice win over AHQ, as we said when I interviewed Matt as part of our State of NA podcast, which if you haven't checked out yet, you absolutely should. Cloud9 won the games they needed to win, and that's enough. It says a lot about Cloud9 that in that high pressure moment, they stepped up and were able to grab those victories where they can find them. That is a testament to their skill set, and the consistency, I think, from week 1 to week 2 was clearly stronger with Cloud9 because there was no consistency with EDG in week 1. So am I disappointed as an esports fan that EDG wasn't able to come together and put together that full 2 weeks of games that I think they're capable of? Well, of course. I think that when you see the way that they were just so dominant in their wins over AHQ and Cloud9 in week 2, you have to wonder what this team could have been. But I know what Cloud9 is. I feel comfortable saying that this is a team that earned their top 8 spot, and maybe in another group, maybe in a less tilting environment after that loss that EDG had against SK Telecom, which really I think was the defining breaking point of that first week. Maybe things would be different, but as they are now, Cloud9 was the better, more consistent team, even if they didn't necessarily show the huge peak that we saw from EDG at their best. So that was Group A, and I guess we should just move on to Group B. Let's keep this momentum going here. I was so sad watching Group B. I don't know what I expected. I think that, heading into week 1, I told myself, this is Immortals. I'm a fan. Good things never happen to teams I'm a fan of. I know better than to get my hopes up. And I also knew in the back of my head that we were a team with a whole bunch of rookies and young guys, especially guys who have shown some nerves issues on the big stage before. This can be a huge concern. And I absolutely was terrified when we went into this initial group stage that those issues were going to come back to haunt us. And of course, they absolutely did. But given how in week 1, I felt all of those issues came up and Immortals handled them so well, I made the assumption that week 2 was going to be more of the same. That this was going to be, oh yes, this is the moment in which we get to see Immortals take this step up. They are going to get out of this group. They are going to show that they have this understanding of the early game that makes them so dangerous compared to even other North American teams, and that the star power there is going to be enough to get them through. And I mean, it just all fell apart. And I don't think that this isn't news. I think it's pretty clear when you lose 4 games and 4 chances that things have gone horribly wrong. I know a lot of the fingers are going to be pointed at Cody's son, and certainly his moments where he screwed up were the most pronounced. I think they were the most clearly visible. But I think you're going to have to take a hard look at Pobelter's performance in particular. I felt like he's a guy, as a veteran leader, we would expect to step up in that moment where the rest of the team is reeling, and he just wasn't there. And that's huge. That's something that just tears away at your ceiling as a team. And I really feel like that side of things fell apart, and it's unfortunate, but that's something that when you're in the off season and you're looking at how you can improve things, that's something you're going to have to look at. And you're also going to have to look at how do you get Ale and Cody's son comfortable? Because we have this fallacy, I think, in which we say that, oh, well, once they've been there before, they get it. But Immortals had played in the finals against TSM, and they showed the same nerves issues that they showed in week 1 of Worlds, and that got worse in week 2 of Worlds. And maybe it's just, as you ratchet up the pressure as individual games get more important, that's when we start getting to this point where their performances can fall apart. But I don't necessarily agree with that theory. I think that ultimately there are personality types that thrive in big moments, that seek them out, and there are personality types that freeze and that are so desperate to make a play that they overstep their grounds. And I think that that's what happened with Cody Sun and Ale. And I think it's what's going to continue to happen if this coaching staff doesn't take a long look at how to directly deal with that, how to get them from a psychological perspective in a more comfortable place. And of course, I'm focusing on Immortals when really everyone wishes I was focusing on the Gigabyte Marines right now, because they were by far the more fun team, and they are a very fun team. I loved seeing their very interesting strategy against Immortals, as much as I hate losing to it. I thought that they clearly showed an understanding with that Urgot top that they're able to do interesting things to catch their opponent off guard, and certainly they've shown in games like their first Longzhu match, where they tried all these weird lane swaps, that they can really take their opponent out of their comfort zone, no matter how good their opponent is. And their game against Longzhu was surprisingly close. And by that I mean they were ahead by 11,000 gold at one point, which against a Korean team means that you're close, apparently, because this is the second time now in 2 weeks that we've seen a Korean team down 11,000 gold and making this massive outplay in a team fight to come back. So that's just the world we live in. Welcome to League of Legends, when all hail our Korean overlords. But look, the Gigabyte Marines did everything you could possibly ask them to do at this tournament. I think that they showed that they are a strong team in their own right, that you can't just label them as a wild card team. And certainly that's something where I hope moving forward we take teams like this into account and remind ourselves that even teams from these minor regions that don't necessarily have a ton of talent around them, sometimes this perfect storm can hit, much like Albus Nox Luna in 2016. We've now seen it enough that I hope that people understand that things like the play-ins are really valuable in helping us identify these teams and giving them an opportunity to prove that on the world stage. And say what you will about, them not being able to get out of groups and the group not particularly being strong compared to some of the other groups that we saw in this tournament, but I don't think anyone would say that the Gigabyte Marines didn't deserve to be on that stage. So I wish them the best of luck. Obviously, Optimus is now gone. That's a problem. I think historically we have found that when teams like that lose a significant star player, it's very hard for them to come up with somebody new to fill that gap. So we'll see how that goes. Let's move on to Group C, because I think that this is a group that most of what I want to say I already said last week. This was a group that doubled down on the results that we had seen from week one. Fenerbahce was still Fenerbahce, still can't get a win, came close in one of their 3 games, but then ultimately threw because they don't have an understanding of how to play together as a team fighting unit when it matters most in that late game stage. That's all according to plan. We've seen this before. We will likely see it again from a team like Fenerbahce. That's what a happy to be here wildcard team looks like. G2 Esports, I give them all the credit in the world. I thought their game against Royal was incredibly impressive. I thought that they did a great job in securing that win. I think that's really all you can ask of a team in that spot, is that they can come together and find a way to counter a lot of what we were seeing. And it was really great to see, because they were beating Royal at their own game. They were the ones that took those early game advantages. They were the ones that looked to snowball these early towers and just push this tempo advantage. It was such a complete game, particularly from Perks and Sven. Expect obviously had some great moments as well, and seeing them all play together as a unit, I think it was a great send-off for this team, because this is the end of an era. Perks has talked about this. Expect has mentioned that he's not necessarily going to be staying around in the West after this. So I think that clearly this is the end of an era, and that was as good a game as any to end it on. I know that technically the Fenerbahce game was their last game, and that's very nice for sentimental reasons because the Yasuo pick comes in, and apparently that was something that Mithy did for Perks without asking because he knew Perks wanted to play it, and it was their last game, so let's do the thing. And I'm not crying, you're crying. But you know, at the end of the day, they needed to get past Samsung, and that was always going to be a very tough ask. This is a very difficult group. This was a Samsung team that desperately needed the wins because they were struggling very much with Royal, and unfortunately, while G2 did a very good job of getting that early game snowball going against Royal, Samsung was just a little bit more methodical in their defense, a little bit easier at closing things out and really gaining every little advantage, squeezing the life out of this G2 roster. And you know, at the end of the day, I think that G2 has a lot to be proud of. I think there are a lot of question marks, obviously, with this team now that we're heading into this off season. Where are they going to be in North America? Are they going to be in Europe? Are they, you know, what players, if they do go to North America, are they going to take with them? Or what players stick around with this team regardless of what region they're in? We've got a lot of questions right now and not a lot of answers. And I think that makes it for a very fascinating team. It did feel very end of an era at the end of that game against Fenerbahce. You know, we haven't seen a team win 4 consecutive LCS championships in either North America or Europe before G2 did it. And while certainly there were some hiccups along the way, the first Worlds, the first MSI did not go according to plan, I think this team ultimately accomplished a level of dominance that is very rarely seen in professional League of Legends play. And they should be very proud of what they accomplished. I think this is a team that ultimately did everything you could ask of them at this event and did everything you could ask of them in regional play and created a dynasty out of nowhere, essentially, because they were a new team in 2016. We don't see that very often. We're much more likely to see a team like Immortals have to get close and then fail miserably in the playoffs for like 2 or 3 splits before finally getting up there, or you have to be an amalgamation of all of these superstars like an Origin, and then they fell apart as well, right? For G2 to do it as sustainably as they have for 4 straight splits, 2 full years of G2 dominance, that is a hell of an accomplishment, and my hat goes off to all of those players and Ocelot and everyone who runs that team for putting it all together, because they should be proud of it. You know, regardless of how this tournament went. And I hope that people in Europe realize that. I hope that the European fans are acknowledging this and giving them their dues, because while of course people would like to see their own team win, and it's unfortunate when you see the same teams winning all the time if you're not a fan of that team, but you got to respect the greats, and this was a truly great team. Let's get into Group D, and I'm going to go really quickly with this one because I already talked about TSM for 40 minutes on the NA State of the NA podcast that Matt Galbraith and I did a couple days back. So I will refer you to that if you want an in-depth look, a truly in-depth look at Team Solo Mid. That's the best place to get it. I don't want to repeat myself other than to say this is a team that has failed to establish an identity of their own and has built their reputation by smoothing off the edges of players that gave them their niche, their own personality, to fit this amalgamous just mold of TSM, whatever that means. You know, imagine like the black, ominous monolith of a team that just has no room for the kind of creativity, the identity, the ingenuity that you would expect, just really talented and getting by in their own region through that talent, not pushing themselves forward in a way that allows them to keep up with other regions that are being forced to come up with those new ways to attack the most talented teams and keep themselves alive. And you know what? All the criticism I say about Team Solo Mid, you throw that right at Flash Wolves. Absolutely throw that at Flash Wolves. And I know we have lesser expectations of them because they're in Taiwan, and outside of me, a lot of people don't seem to care about Taiwan. There was a great comment by, I believe it was Zender Torres Gumiho on Twitter, of how difficult it is to write about the failings of the LMS, knowing that things are probably not going to get better. And that is unfortunately where I stand when I watch Flash Wolves and I watch AHQ. They need to make replacements, but who knows where those next guys are going to be, because there aren't any teams that do a very good job of providing the same level of infrastructure as those two have. There isn't this consistency in their quality of opponent. They, in many ways, have the same flaws of a lot of these minor regions, except with a player base and an infrastructure at the very top that exceeds what you would expect in those regards. So they're not a minor region in terms of what we should be seeing from them, but they very much are in terms of the quality of team that they're putting out there, because the gap between the best and the worst is where it stands right now. I don't know how to fix it unless Riot really wants to fix it. I think it's become clear that Garena has invested everything that they have to invest in that particular side of things. I know that they're an easy punching bag and they do a lot of shady stuff in different games, different aspects of the company. So I get people who are looking to blame them. However, I really do feel like ultimately Riot's the one who has to give them the funding that they need to do the things they need to do. And so far, that hasn't happened, and that's how we've ended up here. And that's the group stage. That's everything that you need to know about the teams that have been eliminated. Let's get into the teams that are still playing. Let's get into the meat of this podcast. And we're going to start, of course, with Samsung Galaxy versus Longzhu Gaming. That's right, a Korean clash in the quarterfinals. The second time that's happened in history. First one was, of course, KT Rolster, when they went up against the Coup Tigers in 2015. And I think historically, Korean matches versus Korean matches have always been exciting to see in best of fives. Of course, this is when the LCK supremacists say, well, you could have this all the time if you watched a little-known league. It's called the LCK. And yes, I understand. And guess what? I do watch the playoffs of the LCK, and I enjoy those as well. But it's a little bit different on the World Championship stage. And I think that something that we underrate when we look at when we call Worlds LCK autumn, we forget that the patch is frozen throughout all of this time. This is now 2 weeks of games, really 3 if you want to go back to the play-ins, that we've seen all of these different compositions being tried out. We've seen shifts in the ebb and flow of what teams are looking for and what teams are prioritizing. And we're only going to see little shifts from here. And those little moments can be surprising and turn a series in a way that you wouldn't expect, because we think that things are solved, right? We've seen so many games, obviously things are solved. And then you look at good old Gorilla and he's just laughing because he's got this wonderful Misfortune support pick last year. And it's moments like that that really show the next level of thinking that separates a great team from a World Championship caliber team. And ultimately, that's the kind of thing you can only get when you have a patch freeze for this long, because you have so many different games from so many different regions all coming together in one mesh of a thing, and sorting all that out takes time that most of the time these teams just don't have. So obviously, I think that the ingenuity of these teams is going to be a factor here. And of course, I'm going to give that advantage to Longzhu because they do have Gorilla on this team, and Gorilla has just been such a brilliant strategic mind over the course of his career. I think it's fair to say that the Coup/Rocks Tigers would not have been nearly the team that they were had it not been for his leadership, for his shot calling, and for his ingenuity. And if I were a betting man, which I absolutely am, you heard the ad read at the beginning of this show, folks, I would say that he's going to have at least one or two more picks coming up over the course of this bracket stage that surprise some people. I think he's going to do something. I don't know where that's going to be. I'm not even sure it's going to be in his lane, but I do think that ultimately he's going to help find some little interaction that just takes his teammates to the next level, and I have trust in him for that. So outside of that, though, let's assume that Longzhu wants to hold on to these pocket picks as much as they can because this is a team that believes they're going to get to the finals. Who do I think has the advantage here? Well, Samsung has a very clear problem that you have to overcome if you're going to place your money on a Samsung victory here. And that problem is an absolute lack of early game pressure. This is not to say that they have the worst early game of the event. Far from it. I think they're just about average. They actually have the same early game rating as the Flash Wolves, funnily enough. But very few teams underneath them are still around in this tournament. We have seen, especially in week 2, the game's paces have just accelerated as teams have said, well, we could pick these late scaling comps, or we could pick compositions that allow us to potentially snowball those resources earlier in the game, so we don't even have to worry about what happens if we get to those late game scaling team fighting moments. And that is a problem for Samsung because late game team fighting is their strength. They're very good at playing this defensive mold and making sure that they rotate such that the towers aren't going down, and they wait to scale up so they can have that big fight near the Baron pit. And certainly all of that is still there. I think that Ambition is a great shot caller and decision maker to prevent any early game catastrophes. You'd be surprised when you look back at the first 15 minutes of each of the games they played. Very few of them they actually were allowing significant numbers of kills or towers. It was really about the 20-minute mark when teams are transitioning from the early game into a full-on mid-game that they were having their biggest flaws. They just weren't doing anything to help themselves in the early game. But this is when you just have to ask the question of, what do you do against a team in Longzhu that has some of the best lanes in this tournament by far? Because Cuvée is a great player. I like Cuvée a lot. I think he's one of the best, team fight, peeling top laners. I think he's got a very good sense of when to engage in team fights. But I don't like him into Con as an individual laning matchup. I don't think that Cuvée is a mechanically talented top laner to the extent that he can outplay someone like a Con in a 1v1. That's not really his style. He's much more of a team player. Ambition, doesn't matter what you put him on, he's not doing anything for the first 20 minutes of the game. I really have not seen a Kha'Zix gank as rarely as Ambition's Kha'Zix does. And I know people are going to say, well, there's a reason for that, right? Instead of doing those kinds of ganks, instead of trying to get kills and to get those early advantages, he's going for these crazy jungle invades, right? Look at their jungle rate. It's 53.5%, second highest jungle control rate of the tournament so far. That's worth something, right? And you know what? It is worth something. It absolutely is. Unless you're playing a team like Longzhu, in which getting those jungle resources isn't really going to make or break their team, because Cuz is the least important member of their 5, and you're not getting any opportunities to hold your opponents back in the laning phase if you're focused purely on squeezing out those neutral resources through the jungle. So I consider this a concern for them. I consider it a concern that Crown is not someone who I think plays a lot of the more aggressive mid laners that we're just going to see as we continue on in this tournament. He's much happier scaling up and playing a control mage that can fight around the 30-minute mark. Unfortunately, Victor is not a thing that is really going to be helpful in this particular meta, but that's where he wants to be. And so you're left with a situation in which there's really only one obvious answer, and that would be to put Haru in, because Haru is the mechanical early game jungler that they would be looking for. He does have the understanding of how to really narrow in on these ganks and really get momentum going. And the problem with that is that their shot calling is so much worse when Haru is in there. Ambition is so much better at understanding what each of his laners needs and making sure that he's providing that support rather than just getting this nice KDA. So what are you left with? Well, you're hoping that Ruler and Core JJ turn a big team fight for you in the mid to late game. And certainly Ruler's been capable of that. This team did a very good job of setting him up for those kinds of plays in the World Championship run last year. There's a reason they finished second in the world and maintained all 5 players on their starting roster. But he's had some positioning issues here, and that's going to hold him back against a team in Prey, with Prey and Gorilla and all of these intelligent Longzhu players. They're gonna be able to pick him apart, and I have a hard time selling myself on Samsung Galaxy, because this defensive, let's sit back and ensure that they don't get too much of a lead on us so that we can hold the fight. We hold the line when it matters most. I just don't know if that strategy works in this particular meta as well as what Longzhu can offer. And what Longzhu can offer is, right so far, the most consistent mid laner in the tournament. We can argue best, because Faker obviously has had some incredible moments that I think would be hard for anyone to top. But I just want to point out the BDD is 22, 4, and 44 over 6 games, which is absurd. They have a guy in Prey who has been a team fighting monster, more so than Ruler has been so far. Khan has been incredibly aggressive in those early games, getting all the trades that he needs, but not necessarily needing to full-on win the game for this team in the same way that they had him hard carrying them in their series against SK Telecom in the Korean finals. When Gorilla is your worst performing player by the kind of statistical margins that we look at, you're in a really great spot. And it is worth noting here that Longzhu is the only team at this tournament in which every single player on their roster has a positive gold differential at 10 minutes. Yes, even Rascal. That's absurd. That is absolutely ridiculous. And the last thing that Samsung wanted to hear, because the last thing they want to do is try to repulse another team who's very good early, who transitions incredibly well into the mid to late game with this 52.5% lane efficiency on Longzhu's side. Super strong at controlling basically every meaningful objective. Wards per minute, they're 3rd highest in the league. And, to be fair, Samsung is 2nd right now. And that's obviously worth remembering, is that Samsung can set up fights when they get the chance to. That will be in play. It's just going to be very difficult to do against a team that has as many weapons as Longzhu has in their arsenal. So I think this is a 3-1 in Longzhu's favor. That's my prediction. I locked that into my article on Unicorn, which should be up on the day of games here on the 18th. I'm not sure exactly when it will come live, but I think it's a 3-1. Unicorn has Longzhu at 1.36 versus Samsung at 3.00, which I think is fair. I think that there is certainly some value there for Samsung fans if you want to look at, hey, we finished 2nd in the world last year, and we know how to handle ourselves on this big stage, and we have shown an ability to adapt over time. All these things are fair, and all of them, for plus 200 essentially is pretty solid value. Of course, you can also take them at a plus 1.5 handicap at 1.87, which I think is a lot safer. Only prop bet I would consider would be the over 4.5 maps at plus 190, 2.90 in that decimal system, which I point out because every Korean versus Korean series that we had in 2016, and I believe all but one in 2015, went the full 5 games. So that's absolutely in play, and I think that people who want to jump on that value, if you're not so convinced that Longzhu's weapons are going to be able to puncture through Samsung's defenses, if you want to look at the sloppiness that I think clearly came across in their game against the Gigabyte Marines, where they never should have fallen that far behind in the first place, and against Immortals, where I feel like they could have been cleaner in that end, I think 290 for 5 maps seems like a very nice, solid bet to have to me. SK Telecom versus Misfits. Let's go. Let's go. Oh man, I am so hype for this Misfits team. Consider me a mark, if you want to use the wrestling term. I think Bill Simmons recently called this term the sports mistress. This would be my esports mistress. I'm still very much committed to Roccat. We've had a great relationship for a number of years, and nothing's going to change that. But I can't help how I feel when I watch a Misfits game. There's just that warm, fuzzy feeling inside, and I can't lie to myself. I can't lie to them. I love this team. I really do. And to me, I think it just starts with they fundamentally understand something that so many teams just never do. And that's that you have to be willing to tear the bad elements of your team down in order to build something worthwhile. And Misfits have done that in spades. This was a 6-17 in the regular season. They were counted out by just about everybody, but towards the end of that split, they tried to start shifting the goal numbers down. They continued to work on this throughout the playoffs as their early game got a bit stronger. They focused much more on getting leads in that, and now we're at this point in which there is a clear identity, a sustainable identity with this Misfits team, and they're clearly far more comfortable playing together on this stage, and I love it. I love their coaching staff. I don't love the Yasuo pick, but I love everything else. I love everything else about watching this great early game team, 4th in the world right now, 59.8 on that early game rating, and they lead all teams in jungle control percentage at 55.3 because my boy Maxlore, remember when I was on the Maxlore train a year ago? Oh my goodness, he has paid off my faith in spades. I could not be happier to just see this guy come together. He's one of those people that I always really liked because he's so good at just doing his job. He's very consistent in terms of going where his teammates need him to go, squeezing out the map where he believes that doing so will give his laners indirect advantages. If you can take that blue buff, well, now your mid laner is in a much stronger place than if you'd allowed your opponent to take it, right? So you can really do a lot to aid in indirect ways as well as direct ways, and I think that his pathing has just become cleaner and crisper and more interesting and just adds this element that makes this team so much more dangerous than they would have been otherwise. And I will correct myself from earlier because Misfits have also had all 5 players with a positive goal differential at 10 minutes in this tournament. That is silly. It's silly that this happens once. It's amazing that this happens twice. And it's even more amazing that it's Longzhu and Misfits. Mind explosion, just all of those gifs of the head exploding. Pick your favorite. All of them are happening right now. I will say, when I was looking on the Discord to see what you guys wanted me to focus on, And you should definitely be in that Discord, because then you can throw out questions to me that I will answer on podcast episodes. The question came up, well, can you make sure that you explain how every single one of these underdogs can actually come away with a victory? And so I'm going to spell out the Misfits strategy. They can steal as much of this as they want from me, although I will say that they probably have come up with all of this themselves, because they've got a very strong team of analysts, and I am very happy to say that I was wrong about Daku. Very happy to say that he has turned around my impression of him from a coach that I thought cost them in a lot of ways in the spring playoffs, to now being a guy that is very good at understanding what his players need, as long as that's not Yasuo. But I'm not over that. That was almost cost them their Worlds run. Anyway, Misfits can beat SK Telecom if they go all in on this early game. SK Telecom, of course, they're the reigning champs, 2-time defending, 3-time throughout their history. They've got the best player in the world in Faker. They've got so many weapons in Bang, who is starting to really pick up, especially now that he's playing that Twitch more often, which he is one of the best in the world at that, I think, undoubtedly. Huni's been a little bit more consistent. Peanut has been all right. I think that honestly the jungle position has been the weakest part for SK Telecom, and this is where, if you're Misfits, start by attacking that. Start by attacking what Peanut and Blank have been doing in their jungle. It's been very inconsistent. It's been very slow, kind of prioritizing some power farming rather than trying to get those early ganks going. So this is where Maxlore can make very intelligent decisions that might throw this SK Telecom off. Do some weird things with your pathing. Go up for ganks at weird moments or at levels before you would expect someone to be there. The one that jumps out in my head is one where he went to gank the top lane, and I forget which team this was against, but he went away from the bush while he knew that the opponent was going to be searching in it, and then moved back in at the perfect time to get a great cutoff gank in the top lane. It was a second gank because he had just picked on that same lane previously. I believe it was against Team Solo Mid, because that was a team that got ganked in the top lane super hard in basically every game that was played over the course of the week 2 of the group stage. So I think that he's certainly capable of throwing people off, and throwing SK Telecom off early is a really good plan, because SK Telecom has not been very good at securing early objectives. Right now, their early game rating is a 44.0. That is the worst among teams that are still at this event. It is ridiculous how poor they have been. In First Blood, 33%. First Tower, 33%. First 3 Towers, 33%. 0% of Heralds. 50% of First Dragons, only 53% of Dragons as a whole, less than 50% of Barons. I mean, this has been a complete and utter failing on their part. And oh, by the way, 47.7% jungle control. So if you don't believe that Maxlore could absolutely outsmart what Peanut and Blank have been doing in that early game, man, I think you'd be making a mistake, because Maxlore certainly has the capability of doing it. So if you can get these early leads and you can start getting those early ganks going, then you have to immediately seize upon every single moment you can to snatch those kills. You've got to be picking like on a dime. You see a moment and you have to seize it, and you cannot second guess yourself. You've got to play like a Royal Never Give Up plays, where you're willing to take fights regardless of whether you think they are the safest of all plays. You can't play safe. You can't wait to scale against SK Telecom and pick the perfect moment. I very often criticize teams for taking good fights when they are potentially wasting an opportunity to have a great fight, but you're not going to get great fights against SK Telecom very often. So you have to be active in pursuing those moments when they do arise. And that's going to be mostly, I think you've got to do it through Hans Sama, because you can throw a lot of energy at Faker if you want, have fun with that. Faker's going to basically find an ability to hold his own no matter what you do. He's very good, not necessarily at avoiding the kills, and if you just want to kill, that's something you can certainly grab, but usually you want to get an objective on top of that, and he's so good at farming, and he's so good at finding resources across the rest of the map to even up those plays that I think you're better off trying to keep Bang down, trying to get Hansama going, because he has been the centerpiece of your offense in that mid to late game, and just aim for 30-minute games. You've got to close it out before SK Telecom gets to do SK Telecom things. That's how you win. And I think that they can do it once. I think they can absolutely steal a win on SK Telecom. I do not think this is a 3-0. But I think it's really hard to do that 3 times against the best team in the world. It's a terrible draw for Misfits, and to give them credit where it is due, I think that they have done a very good job on social media, kind of joking around about like, oh yeah, this is the team we have to play, ha ha ha, we're all so screwed. And that's good. It means they're perfectly in the right mindset for this. They seem to have a very good kind of mentality towards all of this. But Misfits don't team fight as cleanly as SK Telecom do. I don't feel like I need to say it, but I guess I should say it out loud. Yes, SK Telecom is a cleaner, crisper, more focused mid to late game team fighting squad. They are so good at picking apart the 1 inch out of position that you might be on your computer screen. And if you don't believe that, go ask EDG how that game felt in week 1, and every game inevitably feels with this SK Telecom roster, because ultimately they have the best player on the Rift at any given moment, and they have this veteran shot calling system, this understanding of the game on such a deep level on the Rift, and of course off the Rift, because as good as Daku has been recently, pick and ban is not necessarily his forte, and Coma is the greatest coach of all time as of this moment. So lots of mismatches on that end. I think that this is a 3-1 for SK Telecom. Like I said, I do believe the Misfits get 1, and that means that I have more faith in them than Unicorn does to a pretty large extent, because they have SK Telecom 1.04 favorites over Misfits at 9.50. That is absurdly high. And I don't know that I would take Misfits at 9.50. As much as I wish I could say I believed in this team enough to give them that faith, it's you got to beat SK Telecom 3 times. And they get to adjust after each game in which you grab a win off of them. That is just so tough. But if you are looking for value for Misfits, if you think that they're better than even I think, if you're more confident in them, you think they can grab at least 2 WAP wins, you can get 4.00 for Misfits plus 1.5. That is some value there, because I do think the Misfits wins 2 maps more often than they get 3-0'd, because I don't think this SK Telecom team is very good at reading out the early game, and I haven't seen any adaptation between week 1 and week 2 that tells me that they understand how to better handle this as we head forward into the bracket stage here. I also think if you want to just go super safe and be like me and just make sure that you get some money back on this series, plus 2.5 for Misfits is 1.80. You literally only need to have them win 1 map to get there, and I think that almost certainly that's going to be the case. So I definitely cannot wait for this series. I cannot wait to see how Misfits holds up in this spot and how much damage they're able to do. But hail to the Kings. That's just where all of this ends up at the end of the day. Let's move on to the 3rd quarterfinals series this week. That is Royal Never Give Up versus Fnatic. So let's get Fnatic out of the way early. I don't get you. I don't understand, Fnatic. Are you good? Are you not good? Are you going to continue to be good? Or is this something that I should just kind of just roll with the punches as you figure yourselves out, because you don't really know either? It's so weird to see a team make a run on like this. I don't know that there is another example that I can point to in World's history where we see a team start as poorly as they did and then come back and end up escaping the group. In fact, I know for a fact we've never had a team come from 0-3 to escape a group, let alone 0-4. But, I mean, that's what they did. And, you know, whether they were necessarily the best team on the Rift and in all of those games is up for debate. I think that in their game against Immortals, it could have easily gone either way. I think that Immortals made as many, if not more, mistakes than Fnatic necessarily made big plays of their own. I think specifically the kind of Baron throw at 21-30 from Immortals was an egregious error. I think that they clearly stomped the Gigabyte Marines, and of course in the tiebreaker games they were much more confident, much more consistent, and I think across the board we saw a team that looked like they belonged to be there, and that's nice to see. I don't know where that was the first week or in their first map against Longzhu even, but I guess better late than never. I don't know. I have a hard time getting hype about this team, mostly because you need very particular elements to make this team work. And the first is that Soaz has to feel comfortable. And Soaz had a couple great games in that week too. And yet he is still at a 1.9 KDA because his bad games have been so bad. Just disastrously bad. And of course, Soaz apologists will say, well, he's been playing all these defensive champions, while everyone else will note, well, so have all these other top laners, and they're doing fine. It's rough. And it's rough because I think Broxa is at this point where he doesn't know where to go. You know, you have this bot lane that is by far the most consistent lane that you have. I think that Jez's is playing all of the, you know, the Lulu and Janna champions the way that you need them to be played. I think that he's making use of the Ardent Sensor champions quite nicely. And Reckless is Reckless and has been doing really well, especially in those team fights. I think that some of the passiveness that we usually attribute to him still have some moments. I think his damage per minute numbers are astoundingly low given the average game time that Fnatic has. It really shouldn't be that hard for him to put out more damage given the gold that's being sent his way, but you know, whatever. He's consistent. He doesn't lose you fights. He doesn't have stupid deaths. And so I understand why Broxa would want to throw some resources down there. I also understand why he'd want to throw him down to Caps, who right now is a mid laner that I think definitely needs resources. I love seeing things like Malzahar out of him because it is a reminder that he is a creative player and that Fnatic is at their best a team that likes to innovate upon itself and throw opponents off guard with it. You know, we talk a lot about the things that have remained problems for Fnatic, how they always like to center their play around one lane at a time and their moves are very telegraphed, and how they really don't seem to be able to get all of their pieces working together in unison at the right moment in one fell swoop. But, you know, I think that we should also give them credit for the consistency in terms of interesting champion picks and in drafts that have all been laid out to the strengths of their players. I do think that there is something to be said about that, and I do think that they deserve some credit for how they've played out the mid games recently. You know, that they've managed to get a whole bunch of resources in the jungle. They're surprisingly high on that jungle control chart. You know, I think their early game rating is not great, but given how bad it was the first week, it's amazing that their goal differential at 15 minutes is somehow positive right now. It should be a lot worse. This team clearly took steps forward, or they took advantage of some teams that were imploding in on themselves. And this is the rub when it comes to Fnatic. Do you believe that the leap between week 1 and week 2 says more about them or more about the teams that they were playing against? And I don't feel like either one of those answers is wrong. I think that it's a little column A and a little column B. My concern is that it feels a lot more like column B, where, okay, so Fnatic, you've gone 2-1 now against a Vietnamese team that always relied on weird picks in order to gain leads and had a mid laner in Optimus who had about 5 or 6 different opportunities to land a shockwave that would have sent you guys home packing at Worlds and could not land a single one of them. I cannot remember being more frustrated by a player in professional game than watching his Orianna shockwaves miss and whiff and whiff and whiff. Mind-boggling. Congratulations, you beat that, and you beat an Immortals team that was so nervous that they looked like they were like small rats having been like caught in a corner and just, with giant cats hovering over them. Like they were just so out of their element. And, Fnatic fans can rightfully say, oh, well, that's a testament to our veteran leadership, right? We have experience. We understand what to do on the international stage. We are confident in ourselves and in getting these guys going. And guys like Soaz, you always talk about how he can be tilted, but yet here he is turning in great performances despite having such a terrible start to this tournament. But it shouldn't have to be this hard. In a group that was clearly very winnable, the fact that Fnatic, the Gigabyte Marines, and Immortals all finished at 2-4, what that tells me is there was not much meaningful difference between these 3 teams. They were all fine. They did what they needed to do to beat each other. None of them could nab a win off of Longzhu. I'm not sure that if you put any of them in any of the other groups, that Fnatic gets out. I don't think the Fnatic gets out of Group A if you replace them with, say, AHQ. I don't think that Fnatic would have been able to be better than Cloud9 on a consistent basis. I don't think that Fnatic played as well as Misfits did at this tournament, and certainly Misfits proved in their playoffs that they were very happy to take that team on head-to-head. And of course, I don't think that they're better than Samsung Galaxy. I know, bold statement, but that leaves the question, right? If they needed a lot of luck and some implosion from their opponents to have this 4-0 run at the end of their group stage, now what does that leave them when they go up against a team like Royal Never Give Up? And Royal is a team that is incredibly entertaining in a way that makes me rethink my entire understanding of League of Legends. And that sounds like hyperbole. Like, okay, Chase, you're being a little silly now. Like, there's no way that they are that mind-blowing, that you've never seen a team like this before. And certainly I've seen aggressive Chinese teams, but you know what I haven't seen? I haven't seen a team that seems at all points to be both a unbeatable monster, but yet an inconsistent or maybe let's say unfocused macro team. I watch League of Legends with the understanding that the smartest teams tend to win, that teams that are able to outthink their opponents and are able to get more advantages, and they're able to do more with the little plays that they have and really capitalize on that. So this is when I tell you that Royal Never Give Up has the second worst early game rating of any team still left of this World Championship at 47.4. I know, I too thought their first 15 minutes was better than that, but that's where we are. What about their their dragon percent? Only 47%, not all that high. Lane efficiency, this is something that all the great teams have, right? All the Korean teams have these amazing lane efficiency stats. This is the main term we use to determine how good a team is at wave management so that they can get neutral objectives after they win those fights. They're at 49.2%, among the worst. I believe, actually, looking at this now, they are indeed the worst among teams that have made it to this point of the tournament. And you know what? Their jungle control rating at 49.5% is not much better. Only SK Telecom and Team WE are worse at that. So how does this happen? How does a team that doesn't have this amazing laning phase, doesn't prepare their waves properly, isn't getting huge advantages in the jungle, isn't setting themselves up to snowball with these amazing rotations, how are they this good? How am I this terrified of Royal Never Give Up? And the only answer I'm left with is because they're just that talented. Because these players are individually so good at the game that it doesn't matter that every single one of them has a negative gold differential at 10 minutes. It doesn't matter that their gold per minute numbers are all a little bit screwy and that none of these, the damage ratios are so thoroughly invested into Uzi just as this one monster of a player. And to put this in perspective, his damage per minute right now is 744. That is indeed the 5th highest of this event. It seems like it was more than that, but it's all of these Chinese AD carries. They're all playing that way right now, and it's nuts to see. But I think even among those, I think he's provided the most immediate kill pressure when he catches people out. I think Zhao Hu has been by far the most consistent of the Chinese mid laners, 13, 2, and 35 at this event, which is just nuts. Very good at mid-game rotations, very good at setting his teammates up and playing things like the Rise to get those kind of plays initialized, get those engages the way that they want. Ming is a very solid mechanical support who makes sure that Uzi isn't getting into a whole bunch of trouble, which is exactly what a RNG support needs to be doing. And hell, MLXG, a guy that I have always kind of been obstinate on, very unable to see what other people love in this guy because people who love him really love this guy. And I've thought he was fine, I think he's always been good, but I haven't seen that greatness. I'm starting to see that now because his engages in these mid-game skirmishes are just delightful, and his ward placement is superb to the point where they're able to set up these fights. Maybe the waves aren't necessarily being set up, but they are giving themselves the visibility such that when they notice that anyone is remotely out of position, they just pounce on it. And then suddenly the fight's happening, and then suddenly the fight is over because Royal are so good at picking their targets and isolating them down and just rapid fire gunning these people out. And it's really fun to watch. I don't know whether it's going to be enough to overcome some of the Korean juggernauts, but they don't have to worry about that this week. This week, they just have to play Fnatic. So, can Fnatic win this series? They can. I don't think any series is so 100% in one direction that it's impossible. I think that Caps has the potential to pull out weird picks that can really add this either like a roaming potential in something like an Aurelion Soul or Lockdown in Malzahar that add these different elements to their team fighting abilities. I think Reckless is an amazing AD carry and is not going to let Uzi just roll all over him. And certainly, if Soaz wants to step up, maybe he can outduel a guy like Let Me. It's just that Fnatic, to do this, would need to be playing at a consistency that we have not seen from them basically ever. Certainly not this year. Maybe like the 2015 Fnatic, like in that summer season where they went undefeated. But that was a very different team with a very different roster. I don't see it in this matchup. I'm predicting this to be a 3-0 for Royal. I think the Fnatic was very lucky to be going up against teams that were imploding at the right time and taking advantage of that, and that is indeed a skill, and they deserve to be here. But they deserve to be exactly here. I think Royal absolutely deserves to be a semifinalist, and I think, depending on how this goes and depending on how SKT looks, Royal could be a finalist. We could finally have another China versus Korea finals. Dare I dream? Do I dare disturb our overlords and speak such heresy? Well, I guess I just did. But Unicorn agrees with me, for the record. They have Royal at 1.15 as favorites against Fnatic at 5.00. That feels fair. I think any more than that, and I'd start squinting at that Fnatic line and being like, well, maybe Royal, Chinese teams don't typically do very well in best of fives. We've seen that they struggle to make adaptations in those moments. Certainly in MSI, that was something that came back to haunt them. But I think in this particular matchup, it's so thoroughly in their favor. And if you believe, like me, that Royal is absolutely going to come out and start gaining some substantial victories, 2.25 for Royal Never Give Up at -2.5 handicap. That would be the 3-0. That would, I think that's worth throwing a couple dollars on. I think that's absolutely in play, because I think that Fnatic is one of those teams that if they lose one game early enough, badly enough, maybe the whole rest of it kind of implodes in on itself. You look at the rest of the bets. If you think the Fnatic's better than I think they are, Fnatic plus 1.5 at 3.20 is a solid amount of value. That allows you to get that 3-2 if you think that China is going to collapse in this spot, which they certainly have before. It would not be unprecedented. So that is indeed where that matchup ends up. And so that means we're finally at the end of this quarterfinals breakdown. It's time to talk about Cloud9 versus Team WE. So let's get Team WE out of the way. Not because I think that they're the less interesting team, but because I think most of you, this is a mostly American and European audience. And since I am traditionally a European analyst, I think that I want to take that extra time to talk about North America and really go a deep dive into it. So Team WE, I loved what I saw from them in the second week. I think they looked much more consistent than they had in the first week. Mystic is a god. Straight up, Mystic is one of the most impressive team fighters I've ever seen. I think his mechanics are beautiful. His 873 damage per minute is the highest of anyone at this event, and I didn't know that damage numbers went that high when it comes to damage per minute and over a 6-game span. He just can take over fights so nicely. And Gia is this brilliant roaming mid laner, so good at supporting his side wave, so good at making sure that unlike a Royal where you don't really see a lot of setup for that next play, Team WE actually is pretty good at setting up. 50.6% lane efficiency. That puts him about middle of the pack when you look at quarterfinalists. But even that little advantage, that just gives them so much versatility compared to Royal. Royal basically has one speed. Team WE can slow things down if they need to and get to that mid to late game where they can trust on guys like Condi to step up and be that strong engage potential. I think the 957's teleports have been rather on point. And of course, Ben at the support position has been all over the place. 89.2% kill participation at this event so far. That's nuts. I don't think I think it's pretty clear that this team as a whole plays very well together. This is a team that looks leagues above what we saw when we watched them in the play-in stage. I think they've taken a lot of time and energy to really refine their strategies and find those little moments in which they can grab advantages. And I really like this team. I think that they are a stronger team than their play-in status would have designated. I think they're a stronger team than, even that 5-1 in a tough Group D. We're going to look back on those wins against Team Solo Mid and against Misfits and say, whoa, that was a really good group, and WE managed to take those wins in such a decisive fashion in that last week. And doesn't that tell us so much about where this team stands? But enough about Team WE. I think we've talked about them enough before, and I think that their strengths as a team are very obvious. There's no hidden variable like, oh yes, this is the secret to Team WE. They're exactly what you think they are. They're a really good team fighting team. They peak particularly well in the mid game, which is when Gia's roams can really start acting up, and I think that Mystic is in particular a brilliant late game team fighter. Doesn't necessarily feel the same urgency as someone like an Uzi to win the game right away when that 25 to 30 minute mark rolls around, because his positioning, I think, is a little sharper. And I think that Ben is so good at securing that vision such that they get the engagements on their side, but they also have that setup involved. So there's a lot with them that is very evident. Cloud9 has been a fascinating team to follow at this event. I had an article that I planned on releasing last week. It's now going to come out sometime this week. I'm retooling it specifically to address this matchup. Last week, I felt like this was the Contractz and Impact show, enabling their already established star players to reach that full potential. And to a certain extent, I still do believe that. I do believe that Impact has looked significantly better at this event than he has during the NALCS. His 241 goal differential at 10 minutes is a testament to that. He's winning lane against basically everybody, and Contractz has done a very good job of making sure those resources are there, and in fact, making sure both solo laners are comfortable in that spot. And while the bot lane's been playing a little bit from behind, Sneaky has stepped up in team fights. I think that he's done a considerable amount of damage given how low his gold percentage is compared to most other AD carries at this event. He's very clearly meant to be the number 2 option, and this team understands that. They're not forcing him to be that star guy just because the rest of the world seems to be playing around their bot lane. They're trusting Jensen to do Jensen things. They're letting Sneaky play the way Sneaky won, and they're letting Impact finally have this greater sense of lane pressure to help give them these little victories. And of course, Smoothie is still Smoothie. His engage potential when he gets the opportunity to play something like a Rakan is still quite nice. But Contractz, to me, is the make or break. If we are to believe that Cloud9 can beat Team WE, it's going to be because Contractz is creating a tempo of the game that works more in Cloud9's favor than Team WE's favor. And this is where you look at these early game ratings, right? And you'd think you'd see a lot of these, Chinese teams at the top, and certainly Edward Gaming was high up there. But of teams still remaining, it's Longzhu 1, Misfits 2, WE 3, Cloud9 4. They are very close in that early game pressure, and so much of that has come down to Contract's ability to play these super aggressive champions like the Graves, champions like a Kha'Zix. I think that they understand that he is not traditionally a tank player, and so they haven't tried to make him one for most of this event. But then they did in a must-win against AHQ. And that, to me, says a lot about this team, because after a week one in which they looked very good against everybody, even in the loss against SK Telecom, felt like they looked outclassed. Suddenly, they did look like they were a tier below some of their greater nemesis in this group. EDG, very dominant in their victory over Cloud9. Felt like they secured that double kill in the bot lane in the 8-minute mark and never really looked back from that particular fight. Game against SK Telecom. Certainly not without some moments where Cloud9 was able to take some towers on the backside. Very good rotations in the that early to mid transition period. But once SKT got some momentum under them, and really Faker got that fizz going a little bit, the split push pressure was just way too much for them to muster. And what both of those games taught Cloud9, and by extension viewers like you guys and analysts like myself, is that Contractz is not the guy that is going to single-handedly turn a series in Cloud9's favor. And of course, this is something that when I say it out loud, it's like, oh, well, isn't that obvious? He's not really intended to be that guy. He's a rookie jungler on the international stage. But so many of their drafts have been run through his skill set, picking these aggressive champions that can then dictate this early pace, get the solo laners going, allow them to start that mid-game snowball. But when push came to shove and they needed that win against AHQ, they put him on the Gragas. They said, we don't trust you to play that way anymore. Let's get Jensen on a carry. Let's get Sneaky on something that does his stuff early. Impact can go on a bruiser champ. Everything peaks in that mid-game. Contractz, you'll do enough in your roams to kind of facilitate what they should be doing just because we picked these great laning matchups for them. And we'll close the game out from there. And, it was a 24-minute victory. It was a clean victory. But WE isn't going to make the mistake that AHQ did in that game of picking 3 losing lanes. And I don't think the Contractz' Gragas is going to have nearly the utility that someone like a Kandi has on that champion. I think that his strength is not in these mid to late game engages and in the kind of skirmish potential and utility that comes with a champion like a Gragas, like a Rek'Sai, and any of those tankier champions that we're seeing consistently come out of the jungle. His whole shtick is, let's get this early kill pressure, let's get those early kills for my team, and let's see where that takes us. And ultimately, to me, if they're going to win this series, they have to decide whether they trust him or not. Because if you put him on the Sejuanis and Gragases of the world, what you are essentially saying is, we don't think that you can do enough to justify the damage that the rest of our composition takes, because if Contractz doesn't work and they go in on these early games, well, now the solo laners aren't getting as much of an advantage. Now they're not getting as much of a snowball potential. Now you're potentially getting to those mid to late game fights and the whole game is turning on you in the way that it did against EDG and SK Telecom. And I think that WE is just as capable of doing it as EDG is. In fact, maybe even a little bit more so, because WE is more comfortable playing in that late game spike than EDG is. This is a really tough matchup for Cloud9. It is also probably the easiest matchup of the 1 seeds that they could have gotten, because at least with Team WE, you don't have the, oh my god, I just died from all of the damage and I don't know why, because that you get from someone like a Royal Never Give Up. And you don't get the incredible macro rotational play from someone like a Longzhu or an SK Telecom. So this is the best case scenario for them. I do think it is possible, if they can get Contractz in this points where it's comfortable, or get him comfortable on a new type of champion and really come up with a better way of making those transition-y periods work in their favor and really get those, mid-game tempo advantages rather than necessarily trying to keep up with an early game that WE does very, very well. I think ultimately this is going to be really hard for them. I think that ultimately this is a Team WE victory. I think it is going to be a 3-2 series. I do think that Cloud9 makes it very close. I think that there's enough talent here and enough intelligent veteran leadership on this team to make it for a very close series. I just don't think they ultimately have that next level of play from the positions that would most need to step up in Contractz and also in Sneaky, who's just not that kind of carry to ultimately take this series. And Unicorn agrees with me. They have Team WE at 1.28. Cloud9 at 3.50. I actually think that there's some value on that. Because as much as I just said all those nice things about China, friendly reminder that China has never done well in best of fives in recent years. They haven't won a quarterfinal series since 2014. So if ever you were going to pick your moment to pick an upset, this would be a nice one to pick, because I think Cloud9 is closer in talent level to what we're going to see from Team WE than Fnatic is to Royal. If you're looking for some handicap odds that are nice, I like Cloud9 at plus 1.5 at 2.10 a lot. I think that's a much safer bet than going completely 3.50. I also think that if you're willing to give WE a little bit more benefit of the doubt, you think that the inexperience of a guy like Contractz and the inconsistency that someone like Impact has shown over the regular season, if you think that maybe that bounces back and costs them, I think 1.70 for Team WE at minus 1.5 is really nice value as well. And I hope that you found this podcast had some really nice value for you. If you enjoyed it, you should let me know in that lovely comment section below. Like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. It genuinely does mean the world to me, and I do respond to every single one of them. Of course, you can also interact more directly with me on the Discord, which you can find in the link to in the comments below. And of course, you can find me on Twitter at RedShirtKing, where we can keep the conversation going there. I really do want to just stress that if you come and join the Discord, we've got a great group of guys there, and we watch games live. That's right, you could be watching the quarterfinals with me on comms over this Discord, picking apart these games step by step as they unfold live. That's something that I think is a ton of fun, and I think we've built a great group of people there. And if you think that sounds like fun, you should definitely join while you still can. And in the meantime, you should stay tuned to unicorn.com, our lovely presenting sponsors, where you can place all of the bets that I recommended today. And of course, are also the site that houses all of my articles, where you'll find a piece that I did for both the Samsung Longzhu matchup and Cloud9 versus Team WE, which will come out later on this week. So definitely be on the lookout for all of that. Be on the lookout for next week, where I will do a semifinals preview and hopefully one other show. I don't want to confirm anything on that yet, but I do believe that there's going to be 2 episodes, much like there were 2 episodes for this week for you guys. So stay tuned for that, and until next time, goodbye, Internet.